So yeah,
All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is about productivity, disability, and the capitalist machine. But I swear it's not as depressing as it sounds. Maybe a little bit. Um, there it goes. Okay. So first, I want to talk about productivity culture. I don't know if like any of you had any sort of hyperfixation that maybe lasted a couple of years with like watching a lot of productivity videos. Maybe this is just a me problem. But I got slightly obsessed with just, being not wasting my time essentially. And I I watched all kinds of like YouTube videos. I've read many books on this. There are so many of them. But I kind of just want to talk about like productivity culture and specifically kind of toxic productivity culture to a certain extent. And this is kind of this, we kind of have a societal and social pressure to really consistently maintain a high level of productivity. And this is also kind of connected to hustle culture, though it's a little bit different. Um, but yeah, I included all of these. There are so many books, they're everywhere. There are also way too many YouTube channels like dedicated to productivity advice. And it's a really big thing. And I kind of want to talk about how that intersects with disability, and kind of what that looks like when you're not necessarily able to perform at the level, at the level, whatever, that like a that an able-bodied, whatever, abled person, non-disabled, is able to for a variety of reasons.
The consensus in the chat is that you are not the only person who went and looked at a lot of these videos for a
That's
while.
good. I'm glad that wasn't just like me. Because I started that when I was like 14, and looking back, I'm like, why why did I spend so much time doing this when I was like a freshman in high school? Uh, but I do want to break down a little bit what productivity is, because I think it can be slightly confusing. So the actual just like dictionary definition is just the state or quality of producing something, which is super helpful. Um, but it's basically creating a thing. Um, that could be anything. Honestly, like the dictionary definition is really broad. But in like industries and organizations and schools, it mostly means producing something that's useful, like valuable, but especially profitable. Um, and it is really focused on work and school, in like productivity culture, versus any other type of productivity. Um, but the actual, part of it like surprised me that like how broad this definition really could be. And it made me start thinking a little differently about what productivity is. But some of the topics that kind of come up in these kind of discussions about productivity culture and like productivity hacks, advice, all that kind of stuff. Time management is a big one. So like the concept of wasting time, or like setting specific times for working or for specific activities, things like time blocking and just basically any time management tip. And even things just like organization systems, planners, planning things, but also study skills, focusing, and also all kinds of techniques and apps out there, especially ones that want your money. Um, they're everywhere. There's all kinds of different advice, but these are some of the main things that they focus on. And with that, you can probably see a little bit where I'm like leading into. There are a lot of ways that disabilities can affect how much productivity advice can actually work. So for those of you with ADHD, which I feel like is probably a majority of you, time blindness is a huge thing, and that can really affect time management. What does that even look like when you have ADHD? And is it even possible to do some of the things that people are talking about? But especially for me, things like chronic pain and fatigue really impact not only like time management, but just like how much I can do in general. Um, and just tasks can take longer for a variety of reasons. You might just not be as fast doing things. There are so many examples. I listed a bunch of them here. If anyone does want to put it in the chat, I am curious if people have other examples that I didn't think about. I can go through some of them, but I also talked about like brain fog, memory issues, even like brain damage, just needing more rest. Maintaining a routine is a whole thing. And the dealing with inaccessibility is incredibly broad. If like a program or whatever that you're using isn't particularly accessible to you, that can make the whole thing not work as well. I don't know if other people like have other ideas, but feel free to put it in the chat or whatever, um, of like productivity advice that doesn't necessarily work for you. But with that, I will go ahead and move on. I will make a little note here, a little caveat to the whole thing. There is productivity advice that isn't that toxic, and some of it is more accommodating and like focuses more on things like self-care and taking care of yourself. In general, the majority of it is still at least a little bit toxic.
So we have a answer in the
Yeah,
chat to your previous question. Ending up in snowball of spending a lot of time upset with yourself over wasted time, and then getting further upset with yourself for not spending that time wisely.
yeah, wasted time is really difficult for me because anytime I'm like, actually resting and taking care of myself, that feels like I'm wasting time and not being as productive as I could be, um, which sucks. But I have seen some decent productivity advice. I mostly just wanted to add that in case people like have like great productivity things that aren't that bad. They exist. I still have problems with some of them. Um, but basically, I kind of ended up on this because I was initially thinking about how productivity advice can really interfere with disabilities. But then I was thinking, like, is productivity something that we should actually strive for at all? Like, who does productivity culture benefit in society? And is it us? Because I feel like it might not be. And I feel like I just needed to like re-examine the entire concept of productivity, but especially in the lens of disability, if that makes sense. Um, so I had a lot of issues with productivity and productivity goals. Because I was thinking about, so I have kind of three main questions here. Like who is benefiting from your productivity? Um, because you probably know, if you have a job and you get, you read your productivity advice books or whatever, and you watch some videos, and you're, so much more productive than you used to be, but that doesn't always mean you're actually getting paid more. You may or may not get a bonus. If you're lucky, you might have like a raise that like meets inflation, so you don't lose money. But oftentimes and people end up doing essentially more work and being more productive for the same pay. Um, and oftentimes, your company or your boss or a CEO is the one who's actually seeing like financial benefits of your work and your increased productivity more than you are. Um, but then I think it's really interesting to think about who's promoting this. Because I always need to keep like reminding myself that productivity culture is typically sold. Like most of the people making this type of content are profiting from it themselves, whether they're getting ad revenue or they're, you're buying their books or their classes or whatever. Um, they're promoting it largely because they get money from it. But overall, in like a world and kind of country standpoint, increased productivity increases economic growth. It makes all the numbers go up, and they like it when the numbers go up. Um, and I was also just thinking about if your boss recommended you a productivity book, that feels just toxic on the surface. Uh, there's there's no great way to think about this. And I actually really wish that Code was here to talk about like anthropology and stuff, because I do think the question about like whether things used to be like this, because obviously like the concept of 8-hour work days is a very modern invention. It's not something that has existed for the vast majority of human history. And specifically, working for companies definitely wasn't a thing. Um, but just in general, as like a broad viewpoint, um, there are a lot of people that are very obsessed with making numbers go bigger and bigger and bigger, and just this essentially just constant economic growth that arguably just cannot really be sustained on an actual limitless basis. Um, but that seems to be right now kind of just the goal of capitalism, and make the numbers go up, your GDP gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that benefits countries, that benefits large companies, but it doesn't actually usually benefit the people who are actually increasing the productivity of everything. Um, and arguably people are, and then there are a lot of different statistics about this, that people are in many ways more productive now than they used to be. But at the same time, our minimum wage is ridiculously low, and a bunch of people have really low standards of living and are in debt and can't make their rent and are struggling. But we still are seeing all this economic growth. So is productivity a goal that we should strive for at all if it's not benefiting us? That being said,
We have a couple of comments in the chat.
yeah,
Um,
we can totally get into that.
First, to a suggestion to read the book that you're given by your boss on company time, which I think that's a good suggestion. Read the book
That's
on
lovely.
company
Yeah.
time. And then a shout out, thanking unions for the fact that it is currently 8 hours, and that it has been worse, even though it definitely could and should be better. But thankfully, it is 8 hours because of unions, and then also that productivity is a necessity, but not a goal necessarily. So, the main comments. The chat also
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I am very grateful that work hours aren't like still 12 or 16 hours or whatever now. It could be worse. But 8 hours is still a lot, and it's probably more than it needs to be. Um, and yeah, productivity is a necessity, and unfortunately, that's kind of where we are. That being said, I do think there's a difference between um because kind of like what I'm talking about is people trying to optimize productivity. And I guess what I'm thinking is like maybe you shouldn't be optimizing productivity in all of these ways if you're not actually going to be the one benefiting from it, or if the people you care about aren't going to be the ones benefiting from it. It's just a soulless corporation, or like a CEO who already has $1 billion is getting another $1 billion, and I'm not sure that that's worth your effort to like work even harder to make other people money. um that being said, I started thinking more about the definition of productivity and just like creating a thing, just the state of producing something. And that's so broad, and I'm not sure if that needs to have such a capitalist lens. Um, and I had this epiphany like yesterday. Um, but I'm not sure that what we think of as like productivity and like productivity culture and like hustle culture and all that stuff needs to be that way and needs to be all that like the word productivity encompasses. Because I think it can encompass a lot more than we usually think about. So I started thinking about like, what if we kind of had a different mindset on what productivity is? Um, mostly because productivity isn't one thing, right? There's nothing in that definition about work and school, because that's not the only things that can be productive. And if you take the broadest view of things, something like taking care of yourself or even being kind to others and like producing positive results and emotions is kind of productivity. Actually, yeah, it totally is productivity. And like you're still producing something, right? Like it's a noun, it's a thing you can do. And it doesn't need to be like you need to make something that makes money or that you get a grade for, and those are the only things that can be productive. Obviously something like making art, you making something that you enjoy, writing, whatever, those can also be productive things. But even just watching a TV show and producing positive emotions within yourself, resting and producing more energy for later, I feel like that's still productivity if you think about it in this broad definition and not the definition that we've given it, that it has in capitalism. Um, but I also think just when I'm thinking about productivity now, um, I'm kind of starting to think about more who am I working for? So not literally like what company you're working for, but like why are you working and who are you trying to benefit? Right? Are you trying to benefit yourself and your family and the people that you care about? Or are you trying to benefit someone else? And I think most people, you're probably working because you want to support yourself and your family and the people that you care about. You're not working to give a CEO a lot of money. And with that, maybe you don't need to optimize your productivity at all. If you're not going to be benefiting from it and it's just some already rich CEO getting richer, maybe that's not a great goal. Um, And I also just wanted to say, a lot of people will like try to increase their productivity in the hopes of getting a bonus. But just so we're on the same page, potential money is not money. That's not what that is. If you're not getting paid, you should not be working like 80 hours a week in the hopes of getting a bonus. That's not how it works. Uh, and yeah, I have I guess in general, it's fine if a company or someone in power benefits in some ways, but should they really be benefiting more than you? Because that bothers me. Um, but I guess just in general, I'm thinking about like what are my goals, and are they mine? Right? Because like, are your goals yours, or like, why are you in college? Is it so that you can learn and get a degree and maybe get a good job? Or is it because like your parents want you to be here? You think this is the only way to get a good job? And then how is what you're working towards actually giving you something that you want? Um, and I think it's giving me a very different idea of like what it means to be productive and how I make goals in general. Um, but that's kind of where I'm at. I also wrote down some discussion questions, though I think I didn't write this down, but I think the idea of like quiet quitting really also plays into this conversation. But this is basically the end of like the actual presentation, and we can get more into a discussion about it. I'm very curious. I'm worried that maybe other people have already had this epiphany, and this was just me figuring this out yesterday in like my 5th year of college. Um, but I think this has been very helpful for me in like the past 24 hours that I figured this out. So you can go ahead and stop.